So wonderful to see people arriving. Hi, everybody.
Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment or two. Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Equations of Mighty Stream and Faith Communities Go Green, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's program, Citizens, Not Politicians, How You Can Help Advance Fair Districts in Ohio. My name is Justin Kirshner, and I am a member of the Jewish Faith. I am currently the Regional Director of AJC Cincinnati, and I'm also the co-founder of the Greater Cincinnati Voter Collaborative. It is an honor to moderate today's panel. Like most others on the call, my faith values compel me to be civically active, to repair our world, and to contribute to our community. I'd like to first begin our program today by introducing our speakers. First, we'll have Ariel Miller, who is an Episcopalian Christian and the advocacy co-chair of Faith Communities Go Green. And she'll be followed by Ray Vuick, who is an advocate with the League of Women Voters in Fair Districts, Ohio, on voter education and advocacy. And so briefly, we'll get right into our program today. So our agenda is going to be, we're going to first hear from Ariel, where she'll discuss the problems and disconnect between voter preferences and elected officials' actions around public policy in the state of Ohio. Then we'll hear from Ray, who's going to be talking and really unpacking the redistricting ballot, gerrymandering, and why it's problematic. And she'll also touch on the Citizens, Not Politicians constitutional ballot amendment that we'll all be seeing in November. And then we will pass it back off to Ariel, who will invite us into a call to action on what we can do around these issues. Followed by our speakers, I will moderate a question and answer session for a bit, and then we will close out. Alrighty. If you have a question during our program today, we will answer them all in our Q&A portion towards the end. And so please, you can put them in the chat at any time, but just know that we will definitely address them towards the end. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Ariel. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Justin. So I am speaking to you from my faith perspective because this is part of the Festival of Faiths. And I am an Episcopal Christian, as Justin told you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what my faith community is doing. But a lot of the concepts I'm drawing from really come from the Hebrew scriptures, especially the prophets. And I'm afraid a lot of what I'm going to be saying falls under the rubric of woe to you. I'm going to talk about specific policies which are distorted and warped in Ohio, and which I see as reflecting sin against vulnerable people. These include racism, gun violence, and environmental air pollution and climate change. So, Joe, if you want to cue up my first slide, we're going to try to make the case to you about why faith calls for justice and dignity really require us to take action on injustice of specific kinds in our state. I want to tell you about some policies that seem to be warped by gerrymandering. For this reason, that with gerrymandering, that allows legislators to do corrupt things without being held accountable. And Ray and I are going to be talking to you about how you and your congregation have an unbelievable opportunity in 2024 to try and strike at these problems at the root by passing another redistricting reform. Okay, Joey, can we have the next slide? So I come from the Episcopal Church, which is a branch of the Anglican community, which is a worldwide Protestant denomination. And our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, has been leading our church for several years now on a quest to overcome racism. And we call it Becoming Beloved Community. We've got a number of disciplines that we follow because we are disciples. And we start by trying to apply these disciplines to our own record as a church on racism. For example, we're supposed to be looking for the truth and telling the truth. And an example of that would be my granddaughters remarking to us yesterday when she visited our church, "Why are there no Black people in this congregation?" We're starting the search for a new parish priest. And one of the questions we would be asking ourselves under telling the truth would be, why have we never had a Black rector? Would we be open? Would we welcome a Black rector? Would a Black rector want to come and serve our church? Is it safe? Another example is proclaiming the dream. That's a discipline of saying, if the reality that we have right now is displeasing to God and sinful, what conditions would be closer to what God's looking for? And surely racial equity and representation in our church would be closer to what we believe God wants, because we believe that we are all children of God, all equally beloved of God, no matter what our faith. Practicing the way is another discipline, and that means trying to live as the prophets and as Jesus lived, and to live with compassion, humility, and justice. So, for example, in our congregation, that would mean, as a lot of negative and hateful and fear-mongering rhetoric is swirling around immigrants, that we are getting to know our Mauritanian neighbors and listening to their stories and cheering for them when they achieve really important milestones like getting a work visa. Repairing the breach is the final discipline, and I would say that Citizens Not Politicians redistricting reform would be an example of repairing the breach. Applied to our congregation, repairing the breach would include things like our rector putting a Black Lives Matter sign in his front yard in Wyoming, and really running into some pretty severe pushback and leaving that sign up. Working for the town of Wyoming to implement important discernments around its role in race relations, and championing the start of a Juneteenth celebration in the town of Wyoming, which started very penitentially, but then went on in the second year to be a true celebration of the holiday of Juneteenth. Now, I'm a public policy reporter, so I'm applying this Becoming Beloved Community set of 4 disciplines to public policy in Ohio. This is because a lot of things that affect our daily lives and our liberties are being decided in state legislatures because Congress is pretty dysfunctional. So, for example, Congress has not been able to pass any laws restoring equal access to the vote after several Supreme Court decisions, and it has not been able to pass a fix to gerrymandering on the federal level. So we got to do it here. What is another lens that I use as an Episcopalian? We have baptismal vows that we repeat several times a year. There are 5 of them. And we ask these in public in our worship service. And the 2 that are relevant here are, will you seek and serve God in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? And this covers all of those 4 disciplines of becoming beloved community. Loving your neighbor as yourself means trying to make sure that moms can afford childcare, working moms, or that children are not going hungry, or that elderly people are not losing their homes because their property taxes have gone up. And will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? And we say, I will with God's help. So if there are policies that particularly disproportionately harm specific people, we're going to try and be aware of that and speak out. Okay, Joey, let's do the next slide. Now, I'm going to give you 3 case studies, and I'm going to be quiet for a minute and let you read this slide. The Ohio Pulse poll is done annually by Baldwin Wallace University, and in federal election years, they ask a lot of issue questions. So the last one would have been 2022, and they're probably doing another one now. Now, the idol in this case appears to be white supremacy. And how does this work? If you've got a gerrymandered district, and that means that it's a safe district, so the person who wins election in that district is determined by the small number of people who turn out for a primary. Then if you frame your campaign in terms of issues that resonate with your base voters, who would be a minority of the voters in that district, but nevertheless, those are the people who are turning out in the primary, then you're more likely to keep your seat and be able to do what you want to do with impunity. So I have really, really been grieving over the issue of how we teach about race in Ohio schools and universities. Because as I told you, our church is going through a big discernment over this and has been working on it since 2018 at least. What happened in 2019 and 2020? What happened in 2020? The murder of George Floyd. And a few weeks after he died, the Ohio School Board passed a resolution that reflected on data that they had collected from over 600 school districts, finding evidence, incontrovertible evidence of systemic racism. And they passed a resolution that they were going to work on that so that children of color would not be disproportionately harmed and disadvantaged by the way our schools were operated. The pushback was extreme because as the whole United States was starting to have a real discussion about Black Lives Matter and white privilege, and we were all reading books, remember that? And it was the pandemic, so we were at home reading these books together because we didn't have a lot of other distractions, and we were talking to each other on Zoom. So there was a tremendous effort in our state and other parts of the country to try and reflect on this and do better. It was like saying our body politic is diseased. What is the nature of the disease so that we can cure it? But the Ohio legislature started pressuring the school board to rescind this resolution. And they pressured the governor to appoint 3 new members, who then created a sufficient majority to rescind the resolution and pass another one that schools could not teach divisive content. And this is part of the whole dynamic that we've been seeing in the United States, that history curriculum and diversity, equity, and inclusion are the abuse of children's and the danger to young minds rather than racism. Think about that. So the state legislature started pressuring 2 school board members who refused to vote to rescind the resolution to resign. And they were told that the state Senate would impeach them if they didn't, so they did. Then the voters elected some new school board members to create enough people on the school board to block any curriculum that went against the honest teaching about race. So then the state legislature in the 2023 budget attached a rider stripping the state school board of its authority over curriculum. They attached it as a rider because when they proposed it as standalone legislation, there was so much grief and anger and so much testimony that they couldn't get it through. And you've probably been following the case of Senate Bill 83, which is 1 vote in the House away from going to the governor for signature, which would create a similar chilling effect by virtually eliminating DEI at Ohio's public universities and also in state agencies. Finally, I want to say that instead of talking about guaranteeing that everybody has equal access to the vote, the state legislature has been raising baseless claims of massive voter fraud and saying they're going to protect the integrity of elections by making it harder to vote. And many of the things that they've enacted are disproportionately burdening to people of color. So people of color are kind of being framed as the source of the corruption. Think about that. So for example, if you're a working daycare provider and you now face a law where there's only one drop box in your county and you've got to find the time to get there to deliver your early vote, you're disenfranchised. Okay, let's look at the next. I'm letting you read it. So look at the proportion of gun owners in Ohio in 2023 who supported background checks and red flag laws, and the fact that fewer than 40% of Ohio voters supported permitless concealed carry. So I just want to tell you some things about gun issues in the United States. I think the idolatry here, the idol here, is the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. That has been turned into an idol. It has turned into something that we're worshiping. So remember that in 2019, there was a mass shooting in Dayton, and the gunman killed 9 people and wounded 17 people in 32 seconds. The citizens of Dayton begged Governor DeWine to do something. But the Ohio legislature since then, in the 5 years since then, have passed the bills that you see on the right. Now, the third one, forbidding cities to pass gun safety ordinances stricter than state law, that has actually been in place since 2006, but it's become stricter. There have been revisions to that law that make it even harder for local communities to pass gun safety ordinances. So, for example, Columbus and the city of Cincinnati have been in litigation against the state to try to defend some really sensible gun safety ordinances. Columbus has ordinances requiring safe gun storage and banning high-capacity magazines. And the city solicitor or prosecutor is trying to carry on a case against a parent who had a gun under a sofa cushion, and a little child picked the gun out from under the sofa cushion and pointed it at his head and pulled the trigger. Fortunately, his aim wasn't very good and he just grazed his head. So if I didn't already say it, you know that gun deaths are the leading cause of death in children and youth in the United States. And instead of trying to restrict access to guns or have red flag laws that would protect people from crazy people like that mass shooter in Dayton, our state legislature passed a law allowing school districts to arm staff with just over 220 hours of safety training, as opposed to the law before, which was that they needed at least 720 hours. And because discipline is disproportionately administered against students of color, who are the children most vulnerable to be shot by a frightened teacher in the United States? Next slide, please. Now, I'm the advocacy co-chair for Faith Communities Go Green, and I think that climate change is the number one humanitarian danger that we have to face. And Pope Francis in the Catholic Church, our general conventions and diocesan conventions in the Episcopal Church, and many, many other faiths are calling for the care of creation as a humanitarian emergency. Why are we so concerned about this? Use of fossil fuels is contributing to a rapidly heating planet, and the impacts are disproportionately falling on people who are very vulnerable and have done almost nothing to cause the problem. Think of the massive floods that covered 1/3 of Pakistan, destroying infrastructure and destroying farms and exposing the population to epidemics of malaria and dengue. So how is that fair? It was caused by record-breaking monsoons and rapid glacial melting, both exacerbated by climate change. In our country, think of all the vulnerable people breathing the smoke from wildfires, like the clouds that covered our city in 2022 from the wildfires in Canada. Think about the impact on children's lungs. And if you've ever held a child with an asthma attack, think about that. Think about the impact on people who are developing cardiovascular disease because of breathing in these particulates. Now, look at the fact that in 2022, 71% of Ohioans supported tougher restrictions on power plant emissions, which means fossil fuel plants. And our state legislature has passed policies that are ludicrous and unjust. And you can see on the right why I'm upset about this. What is the idol here? The idol, I think, is money. It works, it could work this way, that legislators are getting a lot of contributions from fossil fuel interests because Ohio has very rich deposits of fossil fuels and fracking is a big deal. Also, we've been trying to develop a major plastics industry along the Ohio River from Wheeling down the river. So let's tell voters, let's inflame our base voters by frightening them about renewable energy. And let's play on the trope that, oh, if you have environmental controls, that is going to cost you jobs. And that might really play well in rural parts of the state where there appear to be few alternatives. Oh, let's try to frighten people that utility scale solar is going to destroy their farmland instead of thinking of the possibility of agrovoltaics. Or let's think about Van Wert County, which I visited a couple of years ago, where farmers were really thrilled to have wind turbines on their land because it gave them an absolutely predictable source of annual revenue at a time when drought or massive rains are really threatening their crops. And I talked to one parent who is a farmer, and she said that her child's school now had all kinds of resources because of the property tax paid by the wind turbines that we were visiting. But no, let's tell the voters that natural gas is green energy. That was passed as a rider during the lame duck to a bill called the Chicken Bill. Or let's create obstacles that wind and solar have to face that other forms of generation don't. So for example, if the Power Siting Board approves a solar installation, we have a new law which says that a small minority of the turnout in a previous statewide election can petition the county commissioners to hold a hearing and pass legislation banning a solar project or preemptively banning them in the county. So you all probably have followed something about the House Bill 6 corruption scandal, which caused a massive FBI case resulting in the conviction of the former Speaker of the Ohio House. $61 million worth of bribes. The civil and criminal cases are still proceeding. The former head of the Public Utilities Commission committed suicide when he was about to be held accountable for his corruption. And to be determined how accountable the legislators will be held. They haven't repealed House Bill 6 yet. And we're still paying over $100 million a year as ratepayers for subsidies to 2 obsolete coal plants that are dirty and are poisoning our air. So I think I've ranted enough. I'm going to turn it over to Ray. Thank you very much, Joey.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Ariel. And thank you all for participating today. Thank you for having me. And thanks especially for your interest in Citizens Not Politicians, which is the proposed amendment to the Ohio Constitution to forever and finally end gerrymandering in our state. Now, you can go ahead to the slide deck, Joey. Thank you. Now, Ariel explained very clearly the pernicious role that gerrymandering. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not the first slide. What's the next one? Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Could you keep going? I think they're a little, something must have. No. I think there it is. I'm so sorry, folks. Okay, we're back on track. So Ariel explained the pernicious role that gerrymandering plays in preventing progress on the issues that are so important to you and the communities that you serve. And I think we are all aware of the way that gerrymandering strips voters of our power and makes our elected officials less accountable to us. But also, it's important to note that gerrymandering suppresses voter turnout, because if you feel that your vote constantly doesn't matter, then why bother to show up at the polls at all? And importantly, for the times that we're in now, you have to consider the way that gerrymandering increases hyperpartisanship in our electorate and in our legislative bodies, because gerrymandering oftentimes promotes the most extreme voices and candidates in our politics. I like to say that gerrymandering is politicians choosing their voters instead of we citizens choosing our representatives. Now, if you could go back up to the top, Joey, and I think we'll be in order. Sorry about that again. So before I talk about the Citizens Not Politicians Amendment, I want to give a quick overview of the redistricting process and describe the scope of the problem of gerrymandering that still persists here in Ohio, despite the recent reforms to try to change it, which you may recall. So redistricting is the process of redrawing our electoral boundaries every 10 years following the census. And we do that because the electoral districts should contain roughly the same amount of people so that one district is never more powerful than any other. In Ohio, we're talking about redistricting on 3 maps, our US congressional map and 2 state maps, our Ohio House map and our Ohio Senate map. So in 2015, voters passed an amendment to change the way that we draw the maps for our state maps. So this amendment created a 7-member bipartisan Ohio Redistricting Commission comprised of elected officials. So currently it consists of 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And they are required to pass maps based on a bipartisan majority vote. Then in 2018, voters passed another amendment to change the way that we draw our US congressional map. Now, with that amendment, the legislature still gets the first crack at drawing the map, and they're supposed to do it on a bipartisan supermajority vote. If they're unable to do that, then the process reverts to the Ohio Redistricting Commission. Next slide, please. So despite the reforms, Ohio still manages to be one of the top 10 most gerrymandered states in the country. And that's because Republicans have been able to exploit loopholes in the amendments and in the amendments that were passed. For instance, so I mentioned that the Ohio Redistricting Commission has to pass maps based on a bipartisan majority vote. So if there's the 7 members, that would be the two Democrats along with 2 Republicans, and that would be a bipartisan map. If they are unable to do this and they come to an impasse, the amendment allows them to pass maps based on a single party majority. The consolation being that if maps are passed in this way, they're only good for 4 years or 2 general election cycles versus the requisite 10 years for bipartisan maps. So in this last round of redistricting, which started in 2021, maps were passed by single party vote. The maps were challenged and the maps were struck down as unconstitutional. And this process played out 5 times for our state maps and 2 times for our US congressional maps. And even though they were voted down as unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court, the Republicans were able to unfortunately run out the clock. And that is why we are still voting with unconstitutional maps to this day. So you can go to the next slide, please. So many of you may be asking exactly how gerrymandered are we? And to determine the scope of the problem, we need to look at the difference between the number of votes that a party's candidates receives versus the number of actual seats that they hold. So if we look at our Ohio legislature, Republicans enjoy super majorities in both chambers, despite the fact that they received approximately 59% of the vote share. You could go to the next slide, please. Well, that means for Ohio, that 67 of the 99 House seats are held by Republicans, and in the Senate, it's even worse. 26 of the 33 Senate seats are held by Republicans. And these numbers are similar for our US congressional map as well. Now, when I do these presentations, I often like to tell people that gerrymandering is a bipartisan scam and both parties do it. And no matter which party does it, it's still cheating. So if we lived in a state like New York or Maryland, the Democrats would be the bad guys instead of the Republicans. So looking at the current situation in New York, in their state legislature, the Democratic candidates enjoy supermajorities in both of their chambers as well, even though they only received about 50% of the vote share. Next slide, please. So, you can go past this one, sorry. So the reform campaigns in 2015 and 2018 and their aftermath taught us 2 really important things. First, they taught us that Ohioans really don't like gerrymandering. Both of those amendments passed with over 70% of the vote, and they passed in every county in the state. The second thing we learned is that leaving redistricting in the hands of politicians simply does not work. So that's where Citizens Not Politicians comes in. This amendment will return redistricting, will put redistricting into the hands of Ohio citizens. And the campaign for Citizens Not Politicians was successful in gathering more than the required number of signatures. So you will see this amendment on your ballot this November as issue 1. And when it is passed, it will be enshrined in our Ohio Constitution so that the legislature can't mess with it. And we will be able to vote on citizen-drawn maps as early as the 2026 election cycle. Next slide, please. So what exactly does the amendment do? The amendment replaces the 7-member politician-led Ohio Redistricting Commission with a 15-member Citizens Commission, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 independents. It bans current or former politicians, lobbyists, other paid political operatives, and their immediate family members from serving on the commission. It makes it unconstitutional to favor one political party over another when drawing maps, and this includes the practice of considering an incumbent or a candidate's address when drawing district lines. It will also require the commissioners to strive to keep together communities of interest when redrawing lines. And finally, it creates an independent, transparent process that is chock full of bipartisan checks and balances, from the way that the commissioners are chosen, the way the maps are drafted and adopted, and even the way that challenges are handled at the Ohio Supreme Court. Next slide, please. So the Republicans know that this amendment is a game changer. And that's why they are doing everything in their power to make sure that it fails. The last time around, even if Republicans didn't come out and actively support the reforms of 2015 and 2018, there wasn't a whole lot of opposition. But this time, most Republicans have already spoken out against Citizens Not Politicians Amendment, including Governor and Ohio Redistricting Commission member Mike DeWine. The ballot language, which you may have been reading about in the newspaper this past week, is supposed to be a brief, objective summary of what the amendment will actually do so that voters can make a choice when they see it on their ballot. But as written by Secretary of State and Ohio Redistricting Commission member Frank LaRose, the ballot language reads more like a 3-page long treatise against the amendment. It even goes so far as to say that the amendment requires gerrymandering. Now, the ballot language has, of course, been challenged. This ballot language has been challenged and taken to the Ohio Supreme Court by the campaign. And the campaign has requested an expedited hearing. I've been checking my news feed and the public docket of the Ohio Supreme Court all morning, but I haven't seen any updates yet. But I think we can know that even if the most egregious of the language is tempered down, that it will still fall short of what the campaign has requested that the ballot language say. And that's why it's really critical to not just turn voters out, but to educate voters as to what the amendment actually says and actually will do. So the next set of slides go over some really important voter information, voter resources, and ways that you can become involved. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail because the slide deck, I believe, will be shared with you, and you'll be able to see this for yourselves and print it out and share it with people and post it on social media, etc. But I do want to highlight a few things. So there are still 3 ways to vote in Ohio. The advantage of mail-in voting is that you don't need a photo ID. You just need the last 4 digits of your social security number. Next slide, please. The voter ID law in Ohio is one of the strictest in the country, and it's still relatively new. I believe this was passed in 2023. You folks are required when they go to early vote or to vote at their polling place on election day to have an unexpired state-issued Ohio driver's license or state ID, or a U.S. government-issued military ID, or a U.S. passport. If you don't have proper ID when you go to vote, you should not be turned away. You should still be able to vote, but you will have to vote a provisional ballot. Next slide, please. These are some really important key dates to remember. So very quickly, October 7th is the last day to register to vote. And I always like to tell people, please check your registration. Even if you think you're registered, purges are done every election cycle, and this election cycle is no different. Many voters have been purged from the polls, and they may not know it. So have folks check their registration and make sure they update their registration by October 7th. October 8th is when early voting starts at your Board of Elections. And that's also the day that absentee ballots will start to be sent out to folks who requested them. And if you want an absentee ballot, the last day to request one is October 29th. They need to be postmarked by November 4th. We always like to tell folks, if it's getting close to that deadline, please don't drop it in the mail. Take your ballot to the post office and make sure you get that postmark to make sure that it counts when it gets to the Board of Elections. You can also take your mail-in ballot directly to the Board of Elections and drop it off before polls close on Election Day. Election Day, of course, is November 5th. And if you do go to the polls and you don't have proper ID and you vote a provisional ballot, you are given 4 days or until November 9th to show up at your Board of Election and produce a valid ID so that your provisional vote will actually be counted. Next slide, please. So these are just some really important voter resources. So voteohio.gov is a great clearinghouse for all things voter related. You can do everything from updating your registration to looking at the schedule to finding out where your polling place is. And we always like to give out the phone number 866-R-VOTE, O-U-R-V-O-T-E. And we like to tell people this number is for people who need help or information when if they encounter barriers to voting on Election Day. So please pass that number along. And I'm going to now turn it back over to Ariel to give you some very specific marching orders. You can go to the next slide, Joey.
Okay, so thank you very much, Ray. Really appreciate it. There have been some really good questions in the chat about what we can do about this. Here's the thing. I know a number of you are here because you are trying to put your faith into action in your role as citizens. So I'm going to start by saying, think about what it is about the injustices going on that matters the most to you, and speak in the first person. Mackenzie asked about sample letters to the editor. I think you can write from the perspective of your faith, and you can call out a problem that concerns you and emphasize to people how important an opportunity they have to vote this fall to end the injustice, and point out to them that they're going to have to fight through some misinformation in order to bear witness. Many of you are in houses of worship that are involved in community ministries like soup kitchens or food pantries. You can do a lot along the guidelines that Ray set to help people find out, is my voter registration current? You can use your cell phone to help them check their voter registration status. You can bring a whole bunch of voter registration forms with you, like the League of Women Voters, and help people renew or update their registration. Just talk about this issue. Talk about the opportunity. Talk about the passion you have for a fair and honorable United States where everybody is equally protected by the law and everybody matters. And relate that to your faith. So write a letter to the editor expressing that. Use social media. Offer to give interviews. Publicize the dates that Ray shared with you. Organize forums, but just talk to people. People know you. They respect you. They know that you are not acting out of a conflict of interest. They know that you're a person of integrity. So use the relationships that you have that are based on trust and honesty to tell whatever parts of this story drew you to this forum today and made you want to work on it. We are just so pleased that you are here and that you're going to be sharing this news, and we are now delighted to take your questions.
Before we do that, I just want to quickly let people know that if you go to fairdistrictsohio.org, it's all one word. There are resources there for writing letters to the editor. They offer trainings for to give folks talking points and the best ways to communicate about citizens, not politicians. If you do want to speak to the media, I would urge you to join our Speakers Bureau. It's a very coordinated effort. And if you are holding forums, the Speakers Bureau at Fair Districts Ohio can provide speakers to come and talk about the amendment and answer questions about the amendment. But we do ask you to please coordinate with get involved with Fair Districts Ohio and coordinate with the campaign so that we can make sure that we're reaching everybody and the campaign knows who is out there speaking on behalf of citizens, not politicians.
I would just want to add a couple more things. The amendment has been endorsed by all kinds of people, including the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, the Ohio Council of Churches, the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Ohio, Hunger Network in Ohio, on and on and on. And one cool action that probably Justin's going to talk about. Should I let you talk about your cool idea, Justin? Okay.
Yeah, it's more than a cool idea, but yes, I'm happy to in a moment after we take some questions. Yes. First of all, I just want to, yeah, all good. I just want to say thank you, Ariel and Ray, for such insightful remarks about really important democracy, nonpartisan democracy related initiatives here in the state of Ohio. I did see one question in the chat about letter to the editor support, and I found something that the league put on actually just a few days ago. Another presentation, but it should be able to walk you through the process of how best to write a letter to the editor around this particular issue. And we'll leave it open for other questions. Feel free to raise an emoji hand or unmute yourself if you're there. Are yard signs available someplace?
Yard signs, yeah, yard signs will be available soon. I believe they're gonna, the campaign will have them after September. So very shortly, we should be getting issue 1 yard signs. So I can, I'll pass it along to that information along to Ariel, and then she can hopefully get that out to the rest of you on where you can get your yard signs. But if you go to fairdistrictsohio.org, I'm sure they will have that information on their website as well.
Great. Other questions? Again, thank you, Joey, for sharing the chat so that anyone can watch this presentation as much as they want for the information that was shared.
Real quick, another question I had. So in terms of the language issue, is there ways that we can kind of, you know, again, in our letters to the editor, maybe tell people that about the language being off?
Yeah, I think we should probably wait for the Ohio Supreme Court to make their ruling. It should happen very, very soon. We should know sometime early this week, I would imagine. And then, yes, then I'm sure as I said, some of the most egregious language will be tampered down, but it will still be, I'm sure, misleading and confusing and long. So when I was out yesterday canvassing, and I was telling folks, just don't be fooled. We've seen this playbook before. Just vote yes on issue 1. So yes, but I do think you should include it, but you might want to wait until we know exactly what the ballot language will be.
Thank you, Ray.
My knickers were in a knot all last week. I was so upset about what the ballot board did and the hypocrisy of it. It really is cynical. And basically, one of our state senators said that she introduced the word gerrymandering to kind of suggest that the amendment would require gerrymandering, when in fact it forbids favoring a party. And there's real conflict of interest going here. So just talk about the concept of conflict of interest. Well, who stands to gain by the way this is worded? And the proponents of the ballot initiative had 5 bullet points that they presented for the ballot summary. Basically, very simple, very clear, instead of trying to confuse and frighten voters. And so just letting people know that be wary, because these people want to keep the status quo going, and they're going to lie to you to make it happen.
I see. Thank you. Thank you both. We have a question. Do all library parking lots allow materials to be handed out? A best practice here is, especially when we're dealing with constitutional amendments, which are usually, by the people for the people, is going into a library branch and asking to speak with someone in charge, and just ask them if you're allowed to share the materials out in the parking lot, or if you can hand them to put out at a convenient location for them within their branch. That's usually a best practice. Okay, we'll await any other questions, but I'll share. As part of the Greater Cincinnati Voter Club, which is essentially a collection of various nonpartisan organizations who work on voter engagement in some capacity, have kind of banded together to launch a free rides to the polls initiative that covers all of Greater Cincinnati. So if you know folks who lack transportation, who have accessibility issues, for whatever reason, need to be picked up from a location, taken to either the Board of Elections during early vote or their local neighborhood polling location on election day, we can provide that service free of charge to them, and everything can be found at cincyvotes.org. We are also looking for volunteers who might have the time during early vote or on election day. Just neighbors helping neighbors who will sign up, learn how to get registered to drive voters to the polls, go through a very formal process. It's very easy. The technology that's used is consumable and allows for a really effective and impactful early voting and day of voting process to engage with better turnout rates. So there's those opportunities as well, in addition to working at your boards of elections and just making sure that we have the capacity collectively to make sure that the election runs smoothly. All righty. Any last questions for the group? Comments to share? Okay, well, with that, we want to thank our audience and everyone again. Ariel, Ray, thank you for sharing such insightful and impactful information. To our partners, Mighty Stream, Equation, and Faith Communities Go Green, for supporting efforts such as this. And we encourage you, as shared earlier, to leverage your faith values, whatever they mean to you, to activate for the common good, especially with our 2024 election cycle. So with that, I bid you all a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.